The forgotten playground. When Mia stumbled upon the old playground during her evening jog, it felt like she had stepped into a forgotten world. The rusted swings creaked in the wind, and the merry-go-round stood still, its paint chipped away to reveal a skeletal frame beneath. There was no record of this place on her Maps app, but something about it intrigued her. Against her better judgment, she decided to take a closer look. As Mia approached, the air grew unnaturally cold, and the sound of distant laughter reached her ears. She spun around, expecting to see children playing, but the streets were empty. Shrugging off the uneasy feeling, she walked toward the seesaw. The faded wooden board tilted slightly, as if inviting her to sit. When she placed her hand on the seat, a sharp chill ran through her body. She heard a voice, a child's voice, soft and pleading. "Help me." Mia froze. The voice seemed to come from beneath the ground. She knelt and pressed her ear to the dirt, and that's when she noticed the tiny handprints etched into the soil. They were everywhere, circling the playground. A scream echoed behind her, piercing the eerie silence. She turned, and the swings were now moving violently, as though invisible children were playing. The laughter turned into cries, then shrieks of pain. Panicked, Mia backed away. Her foot sank into a soft patch of earth, and she nearly lost her balance. Looking down, she saw a small shoe sticking out of the dirt. It was too small to belong to an adult. She yanked it free and realized it was caked with blood. Suddenly, the merry-go-round began to spin on its own, faster and faster. Mia felt her body being drawn toward it, as if some unseen force was pulling her. She fought against it, but her legs moved involuntarily. "You can't leave," the voice whispered in her ear, so close it felt like a breath against her neck. With a final burst of strength, Mia broke free and ran. She didn't stop until she reached the safety of her home. When she looked in the mirror, dirt smudged her face, and her hands were scratched, as if she had been digging. The next morning, Mia reported the playground to the authorities. But when they arrived, there was nothing there, just an empty lot overgrown with weeds. The officer shrugged and handed her a missing child's flyer. Mia's heart sank when she saw the face on the paper. It was the same child whose voice had begged for help. Midnight static. James loved listening to his shortwave radio at night. It was his little escape from the monotony of his small-town life. On one particular evening, as he twisted the dials searching for a signal, the radio emitted a burst of static, followed by a faint voice. "Don't turn it off," the voice said. It was soft, almost drowned by the static. James chuckled nervously, thinking it was a prank. He adjusted the frequency, but the voice returned, clearer this time. "You're not alone." The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He turned around instinctively, scanning his dimly lit living room. It was empty. Just as he was about to switch the radio off, the voice became frantic. "Please, don't leave me here." "Who are you?" James asked, his voice trembling. The radio crackled before responding. "I'm trapped. You're the only one who can hear me." James hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. The voice guided him to tune into a specific frequency. When he did, the room filled with an otherworldly hum, and his vision blurred. For a split second, he saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, its features indistinct but undeniably human. Panicked, James unplugged the radio. The hum ceased and the figure vanished. Relieved, he sat back, but the voice came again, this time directly from the unplugged radio. "You shouldn't have done that." The lights flickered, and a shadow moved across the room. James ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The voice grew louder, almost deafening, as if it were inside his head. The next morning, James's friends found his house eerily quiet. The The radio sat on the table, still unplugged, but a single word was scratched into its surface. Help. The watcher in the cornfield. Emma hated taking the backroads home, but tonight she had no choice. Her car's GPS had glitched, directing her through an endless stretch of cornfields. The moon cast an eerie glow over the tall stalks, their shadows twisting unnaturally as the wind rustled through them. As Emma drove, her headlights caught a figure standing on the edge of the field. A scarecrow, she thought at first, but its posture was too human, its head turning slightly as her car passed. She gripped the steering wheel tighter and sped up. A few miles later, her radio crackled to life, emitting static even though it was turned off. A faint voice emerged, whispering, "You're being watched." Emma's heart pounded as she glanced in her rearview mirror. The figure was standing in the middle of the road now, its blank face illuminated by her taillights. She pressed harder on the gas pedal, desperate to put distance between herself and whatever that thing was. Her relief was short-lived. A loud thud came from the roof of her car, as if something heavy had landed on it. She swerved, nearly running off the road, and came to a screeching halt. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate scraping noise moved across the roof. Terrified, Emma grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. Gathering her courage, she cracked the window and called out, "Who's there?" A guttural voice replied, "You shouldn't have come here." Emma screamed and threw the car into reverse, but the vehicle refused to move. The cornfield to her right began to stir violently, stalks bending as if something enormous was pushing through them. A clawed hand reached out, slamming against her window, leaving deep gouges in the glass. She slammed the accelerator, and this time the car roared to life. Emma sped down the road, refusing to look back. When she finally reached the safety of a gas station, she noticed deep scratches running the length of her car, as though something had tried to tear it apart. The next day, she returned with local police, but the back road seemed to have vanished, replaced by an unbroken sea of cornfields. The officer shook his head, telling her the road she described hadn't existed in decades. Echoes of the forest. Nathan loved camping, especially in the dense, untouched forests of Oregon. On this trip, he had chosen a secluded spot miles away from any trailhead, eager for some peace and quiet. As night fell, he lit a small fire and leaned back to enjoy the symphony of crickets and rustling leaves. But as the hours passed, the forest grew unnervingly silent. The usual sounds of nightlife, crickets, owls, even the wind vanished, leaving only the crackle of his fire. Then came the first sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps on leaves. Nathan scanned the treeline with his flashlight, but the beam revealed nothing. Shaking off his unease, he convinced himself it was just an animal and settled back into his chair. Moments later, he heard it again, louder and closer this time. Tap, tap, tap. "Hello?" he called out. No response. Nathan decided to investigate. Grabbing his flashlight, he walked toward the sound. The beam caught something pale in the distance, a figure standing motionless among the trees. It was humanoid but distorted, with unnaturally long limbs and a head that tilted at an unnatural angle. "Who's there?" Nathan demanded, his voice trembling. The figure raised an arm and pointed, not at him, but past him. Nathan turned to see another figure, identical to the first, standing near his campsite. The firelight flickered, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward him like claws. Panicking, Nathan ran back to his tent, only to find it slashed open, his belongings scattered. The tapping sound now came from all directions, echoing through the forest. He grabbed his backpack and bolted, following the trail as best he could in the dark. When he finally reached his car at dawn, he found deep claw marks on the doors and windows, as if something had tried to get inside. Exhausted and terrified, he drove straight home. Weeks later, Nathan found a note tucked under his windshield wiper. It was written in a spidery hand. "You can run, but the forest never forgets."